Are you curious about TCM Security's Practical Junior Malware Researcher Certification exam? Well, if you are, stay tuned. Let's get into it. In the unlikely event you're someone who stumbled across this video and you don't know what the Practical Junior Malware Researcher Certification is, this section is for you. If you are aware of what it is, feel free to skip ahead in the video to get my take on the exam. The PJMR certification literally just tests one's ability to reverse engineer the malware samples that are provided within the exam environment. They identify it as being of intermediate difficulty or skill level required to pass. You have 5 full days to complete the exam, so 120 hours from start to finish. Then 2 days to write your report. Assuming a report is sufficient and you identified the key technical details required to pass the exam, you will schedule a debrief and you will present on one of the samples of your choosing. I'm not going to read off this entire page to you. Feel free to pause, read at any point. As you can see here, the pricing is pretty straightforward at the time of recording. $299 for the exam attempt, $329 with the exam attempt and the training. Something to point out here, as I did see every one of these languages, except for one, and I'm not going to go into specifics, obviously. And I did use Python a good bit to kind of work through some of the, we'll call them challenges along the way during the exam. The training is great. I think Matt, aka Husky Hex, does a phenomenal job at breaking down the key concepts. And he just does it in a way that really you would think a 5-year-old could understand it. Maybe not literally, but it's broken down in a way that anyone with technical skill set can easily digest that information and put it to use. There are, I don't remember exactly how many samples they provide in the training. Going through them and documenting the findings from those will only benefit you when you sit for this exam. I'm going to skip down to some of the frequently asked questions here. Again, how long is the exam? 5 full days, 120 hours from start to finish. You can end early if you finish early. Let's say you get through all 9 samples in the exam. Good. You can just end your exam and then work. You have 48 hours to work on your report. I personally, when I went through the exam, and I'll talk in more detail later on in this video, I actually wrote my report as I was reverse engineering the samples. How difficult is this exam? They hit the nail on the head here that we're all different. We're all starting from different places. For me, again, more details on this to come, but I would say there were a few samples, 2 or 3 that really gave me trouble. But nonetheless, I learned a lot during that experience. Is the provided training enough to pass? Yes, absolutely. It's literally designed to take you from, if you have no skill level or skill set whatsoever in malware reverse engineering, to giving you a decent skill set with practice. Again, touch on those, work through those samples that are provided in the training. And I'm not going to go into a bunch of the training or anything like that. I will drop links to all of the things in the description box. So feel free to kind of jump in and take a look, read through the documentation and such on it. So let's talk about what the passing requirements for the exam are. And then I'll get into, my opinion and thoughts on the exam. Passing requirements are a score of 950 minimum out of a possible 1,250. Points are calculated for each malware sample, plus the working Yara rules and the debrief. There are 4 easy samples on the exam. Each are worth 75 points for a total of 300. There are 3 medium samples on the exam for 100 points each for a total of 300, and 2 hard samples worth 150 points each for a total of 300. So that's a total of 900 you can get just off of all of the samples. The analysis report, there are no points for. That is simply just a requirement. Then you have the working Yara rules for each sample you attempt, and that's 175 total points. And then your technical debrief for one sample of your choosing is 175 points. So that's your total of 1,250. You can slice that up however you want, but you have to score at least a 950 on the exam. As for my preparation in the exam, I did what anybody without a lot of experience in reverse engineering should do, and what I would recommend is I took the Practical Malware Analysis and Triage course, authored by Matt, aka Husky Hacks, and I did do some of the samples associated with that course. Not all of them, but some. And I'll get into why I should have done all of them and also practice documenting as well. The exam environment, you have access to 2 malware analysis virtual machines through a VPN connection. There's a Windows-based VM, which is the Flare VM, and most of you are probably aware of that. And then a Linux-based VM known as Remnux. Again, they're both used often for malware analysis, and in this course, well, in the PMAT course, you're taught how to use both and maximize the potential based on the material within the course. As for my direct experience with the exam, I saw some PowerShell scripts that were malicious, HTA file, a fake email that, if I recall, was in HTML, which did some shady things, and the rest were your typical executable file. It's important to know your PowerShell, know your VB script, Visual Basic script, understand executables and the different languages in which they can be written and compiled. And some of the tools that come to mind right off the top of my head, INetSim is going to be a big one on the Remnux box. That's internet simulation. So for any binaries you have that you're reversing that attempt to do any sort of call out to an IP or a domain, that will get simulated. And you'll be able to catch things like maybe a follow-on payload, or who knows, there's a lot there. Wireshark is extremely helpful. X32 and X64 DBG on the Windows or on the Flare machine to help walk through any of the binaries if you need to. DNSpy in my case was necessary. PE Studio to just obtain some generic information if that's a tool that you want to use, and also Process Monitor and auto runs. There's others that you'll learn in the PMAT course. Those are the ones that are top of mind. Cutter is another tool as well. Really take the time to understand the power of these tools and try to identify when you would use each of those tools, because they don't apply to all binary types or, malware samples that you'll come across. So try to identify those key differences and when you would use them. And then Yara. Practice writing Yara rules for the samples in the course. It's only going to help you when it's time for you to sit for the exam. Now, one of the things that I really want to talk about is I ran into technical difficulties on day 4 of the exam. I started it on a Wednesday and poked at it after work on Wednesday, Thursday, and that Friday. So that Saturday, my 4th day, I was really just kind of, blocked the family time off and all of that and just kind of powered through the exam. Well, I ran into some technical difficulties for some reason unknown to me at this point. However, my inquiry with TCM support was swiftly responded to and my issue remedied. Had no overall impact to, exam time or submission or anything like that. Huge shout out to DeWalt. Who knows? Maybe Keith hooks him up with a Lambo, right? One can hope for him. But he was a tremendous help on that Saturday afternoon. And I'm pretty sure he was helping me like outside of his typical working hours. But nonetheless, like I sincerely appreciate his help, or your help, DeWalt, if you happen to come across this video. Aside from those things, I struggled initially with finding a flow on documenting. When I went through some of the samples in the training, I didn't practice documenting. So I kind of approached it the same way I did the PNPT last year. I just took screenshots and I was dumping things into Notion. And when I started looking at the template report that's provided, while I had a good like template in Notion, it was easier for me to move all of that stuff into the report itself and actually write the report as I was going through each of the binaries in the exam. Documentation is, again, it's one of those things that will make or break you in this exam, because you have to identify all aspects of these malware samples in order to receive full credit. There's no partial credit. So you need to be able to identify like all of the key technical details of this binary. Is there a follow-on payload? What URLs is it reaching out to? Is it opening like a reverse shell, or what is it doing? Is it ransomware? Like you've got to be able to identify that and document it thoroughly. I can't show you my report. I can tell you that it was 51 pages when I was finished, mostly screenshots, because, you're taking snippets of code and things like that to drop in there. And that was the struggle point for me. The binaries were fun to work through. I had a great time in the exam. One of the most fun exams I've ever taken. And it's well architected. There's probably numerous versions of the exam, just because we're dealing with malware samples, and those can, if you know what you're doing, can pretty much be neutered to not really do extreme harm to any machines. So I wouldn't expect, even if I gave you details, for your exam environment to be the same that I had. Another thing to note is when you get into the Flare machine, you'll see an exams folder on the desktop. You'll open it, then they're labeled 1 through 9. They're not in any particular order, so it's completely random. When I first opened the exam, I started with number 1 because, just trying to go through in order. And I was like, this isn't easy like I was expecting. And I was like, what am I in for with this exam? So at that point, I went through all 9 and just gathered some basic information to put in my report for those. And that's when I realized they were in no particular order. So keep that in mind when you start. You'll probably want to, maybe run strings or cat the file, depending on the file type, to see what's going on. Is there anything easily identifiable within them? Because there's some, like the easy ones are easy by design, of course. And you'll really have to step it up for the medium and hard ones. So in my exam, I successfully completed 8 of 9. The 9th one, which for me was technically like number 2 or something in the way they were listed in the folders. I know it was a hard one. I started poking around at it, wasn't making a whole lot of progress with it. So I just I looked at my report and I was like, I was confident that I had identified all of the key indicators for all of the samples I had attempted. I was very confident in that. So I was like, I'm ending the exam, submitted my report. And I actually did my debrief the next morning and, got a kudos thumbs up on that. And I did pass. If there's any one thing I think you can do to really just help yourself out, familiarize yourself with that report template, walk through most or all of the samples in the training as if you're taking the exam. Also, one thing to note, the exam is not guided in any way like the samples are from the training. There's specific questions that are being asked in the PMAT training. You're not prompted in any way when you sit for the exam. You just know, hey, you're looking for key indicators of this being a malicious file. But I think I've pretty much brain dumped all that I can for this exam. Again, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask me in the comments section below. I will respond with whatever I can without being specific. And happy hacking.